Join Revolution Radio every Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Studio B for Momentary Zen with host Zen Garcia at freedomslips.com, the People Station.
This is Thomas, a.k.a. a Mad Painter. I'd like you to join me Monday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Open Canvas. Don't forget to bring an open mind.
Yes, folks, that's right. Bring an open mind to an open canvas. Again, that is Monday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern. UFOs to government corruption. This is Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
We did not engage in conflict that was out of line with our mission.
Is it disloyal? Is it sedition? Is it treason to oppose the hands of tyranny? Never!
I will never send troops anywhere on a mission of that kind without telling them that if somebody shoots at them, they can darn well shoot back.
I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty! Oh, give me death!
A dark cloud is finally lifting across the world as U.S. military intelligence and their global partners are destroying the deep state criminal power structure that has ruled over our planet for hundreds of years.
We are free with the God-given right, and we shall not yield that right to any power on earth.
Hi, I'm Scott McKay. The world is at, and I am your host on The Tipping Point on Revolution Radio, where every Monday from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern, we bring you the latest in this ensuing takedown of this global criminal empire.
That's an image of strength.
You'll get the raw, hard truth here on The Tipping Point. So come join us Mondays, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern in Studio B at revolution.radio.
This is the people's war. It is our war. We are the fighters. Fight it then. Fight it with all that is in us. And may God defend the right.
Warning! Warning!
We gotta stop them! They're gonna kill us all!
See how the trouble you've started? Be they the government, be they industry, be they organized labor, be they anyone, or human beings. Time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported talk radio station, throwing ourselves upon the gears of the machine. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
You called down the thunder, well now you got it. Chris, you tell them I'm coming! And hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Revolution Radio!
Mini Ice Age Conversations podcast. It's about observing cycles, sharing insights, and solving problems together by combining historical, climate, food, and economic data so you can make informed decisions as we era. Sage Conversations podcast. It's about observing cycles, sharing insights, and solving problems together by combining historical, climate, food, and economic data so you can make informed decisions as we shift into a new era. Godwin joining me tonight. Ransom, it's been an exciting week. All kind of craziness. You know, I don't know if they're even going to pull like a fast one and say, oh, we never, they say there might be a tentative agreement on the rail strike, but who knows? It's a weird world. Here's my whole thing about tonight. The collapse has to be so vast, so large, so big that everybody will absolutely switch over to central bank digital currencies. And I'm seeing more and more about the June start date for the U.S. version of it. Japan's already locking into it. A lot of the major economies across Europe are locking into the central bank digital currency issuance. So, I'm looking at it from kind of a wider perspective, shrinking down as I'm kind to focus in on these near events. We're coming into September 24th, the 50-year Jubilee. Got the German dude in the parliament going the 24th, and everybody's like, hush, hush, hush. They were yelling as somebody translated for me, the other speakers in there. Got the equinox on the 23rd, and then we got the Queen's funeral on the 19th at 11 a.m. on 9/19/2022, 11 a.m. So do the numerology 0919-2022-1100. Too many numerals in there for me to believe it's a coincidence. It's definitely an occult ritual going to be going on at that time, a rebirthing, some kind of spell cast across the world. So, Ransom, I appreciate you joining me tonight. What is happening? What's exciting on your end?
Oh, you forgot the potential for a massive CME there around that same time period when that.
How did I forget that? Yeah, I know. I'm questioning how do you predict that?
Who knows? It could be, it could not be. It's like one of those things. You ever notice that, people that always talked about the asteroid coming in September for years and years and years in a row, and then they just switch it to the next year. The global alarmists are the same way. They keep, fast forwarding the date one more year. We're all going to die. It's only 8 more years. It's only 12 more years. But do you think that they would actually tell you when something was going to happen, or do you think that they would want you to live right up into the event as if everything is stable and normal right now, with the fear of it being that way in the future? I don't think that they would want to warn you in any way, shape, or form if it was anywhere near the time something was going to happen. So you have to do that on your own by reading, what's going down. And I was kind of tripping on this article from the Marshall Project, and what it is it's talking about. So we know about the IRS. We know about under Obama and Bush, giving all of these letter agencies and other organizations that are under the Department of Interior, the Department of Education, etc. They've all been getting lots of guns, training, ammunitions, etc. On top of that, in recent events of the world, we had this pandemic go on. And this article is talking about what happened to the $350 billion that was given for the recovery of said pandemic. And it turns out the government just bought a bunch, more prisons, added more court employees. They bought a bunch of tasers, rifles, and ammunition. Again, about $1.9 trillion is really the real number. But they're saying they gave directly $350 billion to state and local governments to spend on that recovery. Somehow, their equipment went bad because of the pandemic, so they had to recover from the pandemic by buying a bunch of new policing stuff. So, on and on, you see these guys all arming up in the government, and at the same time, you have rumors of, starvation coming our way. What do you think about this alleged railroad strike? Because I've been listening to NPR. Recently, I went up into the mountains in Colorado, so all I had was radio for an outlet. But I was listening to all of the mainstream channels, and I was kind of flipping through and listening to their news breaks, and all of them covered the story of the potential breakdown of supply chain and the repercussions of that if the railroad goes on strike. So I reached out to somebody I know that's a just recently retired conductor, and asked him what he thought about it. And he asked, the guys, whatever that means, his other railroad people that he knows. And, they all think it's a nothing burger, and it's just a fear tactic campaign that somebody came up with, either in the media or maybe the administration. But according to them, their unionization only allows them to strike for 24 hours. So at best, anything would be shut off for like a day and a night. Do you really think that a day and a night could put us, in a really bad supply chain issue, or will things just be delayed a day? You know what I mean? So it's a fear tactic, because I think they want everyone to get ready for what we've been talking about almost every week a little bit, is that the new thing from all the governments is to ration everything, ration your money, ration your freedom, ration your food, ration your power. And it's all supposedly to protect the environment and the world from us who lives on it. I think that's pretty funny. It's kind of like living in an apartment complex that has so many rules that you can't even live inside of the house and use the heat, power, etc. But you still have to pay an absorbent amount of rent to live there. I mean, no one would go there and live there if they told you that, you can only run the heater for an hour. You can only have the air conditioner for like 10 minutes during the middle of the day or something. By the way, we're going to cut your water down where you can't take a bath. And the refrigerators, the size of a small box or something like that. So you're going to.
Can I take a sponge bath? Do you give me enough water to take a sponge bath once a week?
Yeah, but you don't want to use too much water, because that would cause too much carbon. And by the way, I don't know how you're going to eat the bugs if you can't attract the cockroaches in with at least crumbs from having some food. I mean, even the cockroaches won't hang out at your house if you don't have food and you don't have water.
And if it's clean and you're using bleach to wash your floors and then mop up all the smells, tropical climates, nothing like the U.S. If you got, it's just very different. Like if you got roaches in your house and you're up in northern Canada, that's a huge problem. But if you get them in Florida or, Central America or whatever, that's a daily, because they fly in because they're just from the forest too.
Well, my point kind of being is that, we're getting all this fear mongering, and indeed, in reality, they are setting up things for these scenarios to be real. We've been watching it all year, plus real world events, potential wars, realignments of government. But I thought that this was a great article here from CNS News. And it's talking about the amount of money during this last pandemic, the same time period in which they beefed up the government potentially. It's funny that they were pushing the idea of defunding the police. Meanwhile, in the background, they're giving billions of dollars for law enforcement and enforcers of regulations and things. But this year, I think this is T with a trillion, $4,408 billion, $452 million in federal tax collections, setting a record through August this year. Just think about the mind-blowing amount of money that they're going to be wasting on behalf of the American taxpayer. And, we keep sending money over to Ukraine. Even Germany has sent all of their stuff over to the Ukraine, their older weapons and stuff, just like I said that they were going to do, that the countries were going to start doing that. And the Ukraine is still complaining to the world, their little supposed freedom against the Russians cause, that they need all of these more and more billions of dollars and more weapons and more tanks, and they need the new stuff, not the old stuff. So it's beginning to look like they're setting up for years and years of created emergencies in the European continent that's going to be going simultaneously as people going cold. Because as you know, Russia and China are really touting their relationship, and that's all in the headlines too. Now they've told the world that they are a unipack, and it kind of reminds me of a guest that you've had on, is it Nyquist? How he talks about how Russia was being a secret, they just played dead like a possum and pretended to, modernize and be a little progressive with the West. Just long enough to let the technology absorb in, and so that they could, collect all of that stuff. But at the same time, they were secretly have never actually reformed from communism. It's just been a reorganization. And, how are they going to be best buddies with China without essentially being another communist nation? Pretty much that's what's going on. We're drawing the lines for the final countdown of who gets to run the whole show, the whole world government. And, I'm sure you've seen the stories out about the massive amounts of Chinese companies and citizens buying up all the land around United States military bases from coast to coast. So things are looking very bizarre, especially when our administration right now and his family have strong ties to the Communist Party and, the Ukrainian government that's currently absorbing all of these billions and billions of dollars, which, by the way, they've already admitted they don't even know where the money's going. They're not sure where the weapons are going. But, you're supposed to be scared of all the nuke plants and the potential for nuclear war. Plus, guess what? No one's really farming if everybody's playing war.
Yeah. So I'll tell you, I had an interesting conversation, speaking of people today. Neil McCoy Ward, he has a channel. He's an economist, macroeconomist out of the UK. And I spoke with him today. And, we compare information about what the solar fields are doing and then how that may affect humanity. And we're looking at the same thing, but from two different angles, from two different sciences. And Ransom, you could chime in on this too, because exactly, you're in it too. Like the electromagnetic fields that are changing right now, the South Atlantic anomaly and the wandering magnetic poles are showing that it's speeding up. They're even delaying the information. There was a new article out today that what we were getting for 2017 information on the speed of the decomposition of the magnetic field, on how fast, what percentage wise is declining. That information they gave us in 2017 was from 2010. So all the basis of what's being going, it's collapsing at 5% per decade now. Well, that was 2010 information. Know where the new readings now. It's declined another 5% in a single year. So now it's really starting to get into the noticeable. So when you're going at that kind of percentage, even if you just had a full 100% left, which we don't, then you're looking at a 20-year window. But if you look where we had been with that information from 100% down, it was around 80% field strength in 2010 compared to what it was 200 years ago. And basing it out on what they said, 5% per decade, you're looking at hundreds, plural, of years. But since 2010, what interesting thing happened is they had to reorient the runways, and they had to renumber all the runways because the magnetic, the magnetic, not the geophysical, but the magnetic poles had shifted enough where they needed to change the runways because airplanes would be running into each other without demarcating, that it went from 100 degrees to 112 or something like this. Now it's 115, now it's 118. They're going to need to remark them again. So we were talking about this magnetic field anomaly and how the ability for the jet streams and the cloud stellars to stay in their present space. In addition to all the cosmic rays coming in, that they're building new cloud layers from, say, 18,000 to 23,000 feet. Magnetic field declines. This allows all those what we consider stable weather systems to be, hey, go where you want to. It's a party. You can move. You can go to Cuba. Polar vortex. Never could before. So how does this go for civil unrest? And really, what is it about? How does it affect everybody that's listening tonight? How does it affect your life and me and Ransom and everybody else out here? Because we're looking at two things. We're talking about the geopolitics and the things that are in the news. That's a distraction from what they're trying to obfuscate from or make you deflect from or not look at or, give you a distraction so you don't see the thing in front of you, is the magnetic field declines that are going to allow the jet streams and cloud cells and the new layer of clouds in the atmosphere forming to move into different places at different times of the year, which will affect crop production. And, I'll stay back on the geopolitics after that little rant. I was reading that 40% of all fertilizer for next year will be offline. This year, it was approximately 20, and the Pro Farmer Tours and the USDA continue to decline their crop yields after they put out numbers, and they continue to decline because we're coming into the harvest season now, so it's no longer hideable. Now, you could say it was this, that, and the other. But then if you're looking at magnetic field strength decline over, let's say, a decade period, we need to start looking at food production decline over that same decade period. And then once you start overlaying those, mapping those two, data sets together, then you're starting to look and go, hey, wait a minute. There is a correlation on the tonnage or the bushels of food that can be grown compared to where the magnetic field strength declines. Is it 13? Is it 15? Is it 11? Is it 4 or 5? Whatever. There's a correlation in there. The food is being affected greatly, but through time, the collapse of all Chinese dynasties was, they lost the mandate from heaven. They couldn't grow food for the people. Every time you see a famine, what do? They leave. They go to other places. If they can, if they have the means. Anytime you see the food stop, the civilization stops. And see, this is the scariest thing. They can, dangle carrots about impending, 50-year jubilees here and equinox over there and numerology on this side. Oh, there's another thing, stock market this, let's dance, you lead. Okay, don't step on my foot. Let's keep going. But if they were to come outright and tell you there's going to be a rice shortage because India, just today, the largest producer on the planet, and I thought, okay, put it in perspective, numbers. India is the largest rice producer on the planet. Okay, and you just put that as that's a subset. Must be a lot, but you don't know how much. They supply to 15 different countries. The most rice imports of these 15 countries that get it from anywhere in the world comes from India. 15. That buy more Indian rice from all the others like Vietnam, Thailand, China. The United States, believe it or not, has a huge amount of rice production here in the South. Arkansas, man, look at it. There's a huge amount of rice down there. And all other places that are growing rice. Now, we're not talking, well, I don't know if the Italian rice is in there or not, but where you see rice grown across the planet, that is also, let's say, like a vendor like myself. I am all the rest of the rice in the world, and I can sell it to you. But these other 15 countries buy the most from India before they even get down to me to say, hey, we need more. But India is cutting off the rice, and they're going to be charging a 20% tariff export tax on it. And that's for the broken stuff, not even for the good quality. So now you're starting to see it because Argentina did the same thing with corn about 6 months ago. Argentina said we're going to forbid any corn exports and any fertilizer exports. Ain't happening, not going out of Argentina. So they call this resource nationalism. It's starting to happen everywhere. And you need to ask yourself why. Well, Paraguay, they used to grow soybeans to the point where they could export millions of tons. Even that little tiny nation, millions of tons of exports. They're having such an atrocious event because of the Tonga eruption that they're now a soybean importer. So you're starting to see this happen across the world everywhere. And Brazil putting out these rosy forecasts that they're going to, now please don't laugh, everybody. I hope you don't laugh at this. Brazil said overall this year, right now, starting now, they're going to improve or increase all their agricultural production 14%, 14, than they have over the last forever. This will be the record production from last year, 14% above it, but we got this fertilizer shortages inbound and have been inbound. They're here and they're going to intensify. If you see all these chemical factories closing in Europe because the electrical pricing is too high, these factories can't operate, so they shut down. This is why I referenced that 40% shortage next year. So think about that. The amount of information out there showing you that there is a gargantuan loss happening every year, and it's intensifying. See, this is not the first year it's happened. It happened 2 years prior, like 2020, 2019. You can see the declines. They were starting to happen, but at minimal levels like 1, 2, 5%. Noticeable against the record. Because they're supposed to increase production, but then they would lose production for the second year in a row. And you'd be asking why. You're supposed to increase production with all this new ag tech and all the loans to get your machinery and all the GM seed and blah, blah, blah. and you're supposed to increase production, but the last 2 years you declined. All right, well, they can overlay that and say that was COVID. Or you could look at the other one and go, the sun is affecting our jet streams and cloud cells. Well, it's actually affecting our magnetic field around the planet, which has then those knock-on effects of other systems inside that being able to move more freely. Because hurricanes, they're electric. When you look at weather fronts and storm systems, they're electric. Either they're discharging or, taking in a charge. What are the northern lights? Those are field line currents that are glowing coming down because the excitation and the energetics in there are now putting that plasma into glow mode so you can see it. That stuff's invisible otherwise. You don't see it unless there's strong current flowing down there, particle current. It doesn't actually go into glow mode until there's enough electricity in the air, literally the particles coming down the field lines on the northern hemisphere. So once you get a glimpse of all these factors changing, if you're a world body government, you're going to hide that information as much as you can with any other excuse. So everything I'm talking about tonight, I could put that into a chest over on the left here and then compare all the rest of the world's information with it right now. And everything in the rest of the world's information is to get you not to look at the stuff I was just talking about, the crop losses. And Ransom, I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about because you're looking at the plasma petroglyphs and we're seeing a lot of electrical anomalies across the planet. What are those red lights that were coming out of both the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean that pilots saw? What's going on here? Really, the electrics are off the circuit or the board, really.
Yeah, well, I think they know exactly what's going on, and it's kind of like a scenario where you scare everyone and warn them about things that are so far off in the future or potentially in the future that everybody stays in a perpetual state of fear and they act a certain way. But meanwhile, the powers that be, the people that actually know things, are preparing for something big. And you can just see it in the different avenues, like you're talking about crop losses and stuff. Well, how does that, translate to what happens when things get bad and people start moving around and moving their resources around, trying to avoid these systems? And I point your direction to this article right here that's talking about the Customs and Border Patrol sparking fears because after it revealed that 27,000 of its officers have warrantless access to travelers' confiscated phones, which means that they're also scanning people. So they're just taking your information. So that means anybody that goes internationally, they know where you go. And then you combine it with this idea right here. Completely checked out. Major grocery store unveils its new fast scan technology that registered a whole entire basket in one go. So pretty much what they're saying is they're going to implement, which we already knew, a system where everything is scanned, marked, traced, and they know what you have. Just imagine now every little trinket or doodad you buy, it has a little hidden chip in it. So when you walk by a certain scanner, and if the grocery stores are using it, why wouldn't the governments use it also? So they'll know exactly everything that you have on you. They're scanning your phone and your card. They know your financial situation. Now, this is what we were calling before is a social credit score. But how is that social credit score actually physically used on you? We're starting to see how that is. It's, you're tracked and traced from every little bit that you do. But if they can do this, that means that, they don't have people at the stores anymore. So this will turn into like a kind of a ATM for food where, you've seen the drop-off boxes that they've already started putting at the major chains. So what they're trying to do is create an environment where people have no choice, no complaint, no one to talk to for customer service. And they go to these places and they get approved products that are all scanned and traced. So they know what you're eating, where you go, everything that you do completely. And then at the same time, they're telling you that you're going to have to decrease your lifestyle. And there's an article out of PM talking about Oregon's wind farms. See the blades fall off, the bolts fly off, failures. And I was just last night driving through New Mexico, and a completely new field of those things has been put in place. And I have a feeling that they're just going to end up being these weird icons out there to remind everybody of a failed civilization. That might even be the purpose of it, to remind people that they don't have power anymore. And think about the scam that they're really doing with the idea that everything's going to be a computer-driven electric car that somehow magically, saves the planet by not using fossil fuels, even though that's how they get the energy to put into the batteries. But looking into that, it's a fact. It's a fact, though, that there's just not enough rare earth elements currently exposed, mined, or available to any nation on Earth to make the actual population convert over to electric cars. It's just impossible. It's not going to happen. So they're giving fallacies out there of hope, and they're also giving all of these fears at the same time. But you see that the governments are organizing where they have every single person itemized, basically, and they know what they're going to be doing. And then you start looking at the retail market. People aren't really buying stuff right now. They're only buying the things that they have to. And it goes on. In every sector, you see a collapse of whatever kind of market it is, where they're going to stop production of things, or they're laying off workers, and the whole spectrum. And the average worker doesn't really think about all these things. They just go on, they're going to work, they're trying to make enough and float the month and live month to month. And most of them don't own their house, they don't own their cars, what are they going to do when all this stuff gets turned off? I recently watched a video of a 12-year-old. His phone was taken away from him, evidently, but he destroyed his entire living quarters. Everything that anybody in the family owned, in every room, including the apartment. And I kept thinking, they don't own that apartment. And he broke everything, which puts his parents on the hook for it. How long until, you start seeing these nice brand new apartment complexes? Because if you haven't noticed, in the last 20 years, a lot of them have went up, because they've been trying to convert areas of city from single family homes over to multiple family homes that all live in these block things. And it's obvious to me, because when I was a kid, we had to live in the project sometimes. So it's obvious to me when I see a massive apartment complex. What I see is government housing. What I see is a potential for a large ghetto and a hellhole. And that's actually what these places are turning into. And they're nice at first, but whenever the tenants start breaking things and it gets diminished, do you think the property owners are actually going to start fixing these things, or are they going to keep milking every little bit of rent out of them until no one can afford housing? And I think it's ironic. I'm sure you saw the thing about Martha's Vineyard, which really depicts society as a whole, what's going on between the elites and the normal people perfectly. So Martha's Vineyard is like 80% Democrat, and those Democrats are open about open border policy to let as many people in, and they preach to you that you should share, and that you're racist if you don't want to have just an open border where everybody comes and there's just no rules or protections for the actual citizens. And they tell you this over and over again, but DeSantis just said a plane load of illegals, mostly from Venezuela, I believe it is, and they just landed at the Martha's Vineyard airport. And, they just started wandering into town, and these really rich elite people started freaking out. They were freaking out, like, why are they here? We can't take care of them. They can't be on our property. We don't have offices to take care of them, and we don't have the resources. And remember, these are, the medium house is like $1 million there. So
yeah, they have an extra room or two, don't they?
Yeah, they could, they could house people in their massive yards. Ex-presidents live there, superstars live there, comedians, lots of politicians. And what they're telling you is these rules are for you, the peasant, not us. You can't turn it around and make us have to deal with the world that we're creating, because that's the whole idea in the first place, is that they're switching it over to feudalism. And I know that there's an event that's going to happen. I'm not saying we're psychic and we know what it is. It could be, what you were talking about as a non-functional environment for some period just due to cycles. But I've been recently looking at timelines side by side of the historical weather cycles that we talk about a lot, the glacial and interglacial, and then speed it up to about 3,000 years ago. So it's more relevant. but you get to see the little ice age, and you get to see the end of whatever happened pre-3000 BC. And what you see is all of these civilizations pop up, and a lot of fallacies are taught right now. So I've been looking a lot into the city of Teotihuacan because it seems to be some kind of advanced technology. And you got to keep in mind that this is one of the first mega cities built in the Americas at all. And we're talking back in the time when the Sumerians were doing stuff. And, like this is maybe pre-Olmec, but nobody was doing anything. There was the Aryan Indus Valley that had this Sumerians and the Indus Valley culture barely developing. So all of the first things are supposedly happening. However, a massive city with all kinds of complex mathematics and technology is built in South America. And then later they teach that it's an Aztec city who didn't even come around for, another 1,000 years or so. It was buried in dirt. And even the Mayans didn't even build their first city for another 700 years. So nobody knows what this is, but it seems like that the Sumerians, the Indus Valley, etc., all of the cultures that were starting about 3000 BC are getting known as, actively having civilizations. They were just the reboot of whatever just recently happened to them. And then you start looking through this cycle and you can watch all of the empires fall and come up right at these weird changeovers of environmental change. The Little Ice Age being one of those. If you look on the graph, you'll see all of these older civilizations end, the little empires, and then a bunch of really short-lived empires pop up for some time. And we're right at a mini cycle of that right now. So if you look at that history timeline, and here I'll put it for the viewers while you respond to that, you can see that every time an event like this happens, all of the empires disappear and new ones show up all of a sudden. And we're in exactly that spot here at the end of the modern period where this would take place. So right there, I would say 1300, you just see all of these new civilizations and cliques pop up instead of the older ones, from the last couple hundred years. And I noticed also it's 300 years between when they first supposedly find the first Olmec stuff, which is right at the end of the Sumerian culture and right at the end of the Indus Valley culture. And you also got pre-dynastic Egypt going on, right? So that's when the Great Pyramids of Giza were built at the same time as Teotihuacan. And then there's just nothing for a while. Something happened, we don't know. And then the Mayan civilization pops up, and 300 years after Teotihuacan, they're barely starting to build bigger cities, and it takes them another 750 years to build their first stone city. And then you get into 300 years after that, the Aztecs show up at these failed empires. So there's a big space of where these civilizations, what happened to them, we just don't know. There's just like a gap of 300 years or so before anything starts happening. And the Aztecs show up, they claim everything, and 300 years later, Spain shows up and claims everything. So you can see all of these other descendants of the other civilizations from Europe and Africa showing up in the Americas because they know there was civilizations there in the remote past, just like in the Middle East and Africa, as far as Egypt goes. All of this was built right after some kind of calamity, and then they didn't even last, they went under too. Some new people show up. So we're at that same spot. And that's why I'm saying that in the entire world, you can see it. Every single country right now is taking sides with one side or another. They're setting up a polarized world war. And that's where we're at right now. We're right at that spot. So I think that's why they're pushing all of the propaganda to keep everyone afraid, so they don't take control of their governments and allow the people to actually prepare for something, because that's what they're doing. They're keeping the masses distracted, so there's no way that they can prep for what's coming while their little cliques and their continuity of governments worldwide are working hard to set up the next phase of empires.
Will they find the ziggurats that exist now when we come around the next 400 years, or will they try to put those ziggurats back in a third chapter of history? Or do we only ever get 2 chapters of history? Because like you mentioned, 3,600 years, okay. Now, however many resets happen in there because the magnetic anomalies creating a second field when this grand solar minimum occurs, affecting the crust of the earth that would ooze out mud, water, sand, volcanoes, etc. in the top, I don't know, 50 feet of the planet, and how much rifting and pulling and ripping, and this would create new estuaries, river flows, breaking pipelines, bridges pulled from across the banks, railroads ripping apart any kind of conduit in the earth, whether it be water, gas, or electricity, fiber optic cables ripped apart. You know, are we going to get all of this going? Because right now they have us pegged at, what, 3,600 years? That's about, you can find some super old relic information from 8,500 years ago, or you can jump back to Tellinger's work that takes us back 4 ice ages ago. But if you're looking on the academic level, they really rarely go past 3,600 years. And I came across this really interesting article that, and I sent you that link there, Ransom. I was trying to find a few things as you were talking, because you keyed in a few memories for me. Now, I read this lengthy article about a archaeological area that's the most important, that would rival anything in Sumeria, literally. That transition point you're talking about is in this next city, Kish, or somewhere around that area, that is unguarded, that anything is allowed to be stolen that wants to be stolen because they want it to disappear, the history of this area. Now, the city of Kish, they have all these like rebuilt ziggurat walls, and this is like the touristy place. But if you go outside that, and there's a whole area, what's that? Tel Al Uhamir, off the Red Hill. There's multiple areas of this, but you got to realize what they have reconstructed. This one tiny area called Kish would be like 1 or 2 city blocks in the area of the size of all of New York City. No kidding, it's that big. So what the public is allowed to see is, yeah, let's say you go 5 square city blocks you get to walk through. But the rest of it's unguarded. They let people go in there and dig all the time. And this archaeologist from Britain that was there was like, they're doing it on purpose. They're letting people walk away with everything because, look, we were just walking along here in the sand, and dude, there's a tablet, Sumerian cuneiform tablet, just kind of blown out of the wind, and they're like, oh, we'll pick this one up. Like, that much artifact is in this place still from one of the world's oldest city. The transition from Sumerians into Babylonians, where did they go? They went there first. That whole thing you talk about, Babylon, was from this very city that's unprotected. And they want as many people to get in there. It's been unprotected since the American invasion. For those of you who remember 9/11, 9/11, there were no weapons of mass destruction there in Iraq. But the boys got all shut up and a bunch of depleted uranium rounds, and those boys got all sick coming back. Girls too. Oh, was this some damn ghost syndrome? No, it wasn't. It was you shot DU rounds everywhere. And the Gulf War syndrome was chemical radiation poisoning. So they had to get rid of these depleted uranium rounds during that time. And where else to go do it? Shoot them off in the desert. Because, you know, Ransom and I, we talked about this many times about letting off a small grade nuke. It'll just disappear after a while. Desert is a place to shoot this stuff off. And the way that history stems from this very same place. You know, Saddam had an iron fist over all of these. Well, and then you go, well, he was such a tyrant. Well, yeah, he controlled the area with brutal methods. I'll agree. But he sent teams in to look for some of the oldest stuff. And he believed, what was that, Ransom? When he believed he was the reincarnation of Nimrod on the planet again? It was one of these at that point? Nebuchadnezzar, thank you. Yeah, he believed that he was. Now imagine if you'd found what you have 30 years to control a complete country that was the birth cradle of civilization after the Sumerians, and you controlled every archaeological dig on the oldest place on the planet after the Sumerians. Like, what kind of crazy stuff would you find? Outside of Kish, this area is like 50 square miles of a big-ass city that was there. Truly a full functioning city. Imagine Atlanta or Los Angeles or Chicago or New York. going under the desert sands for 4,000 years, getting sandblasted, what would be left there? That's what that is. So there's a huge missing chapter of history. So we come to this next reset here. I'm wondering how much of the history will be left. I started with a point with that, and the amount of, I cannot find the link, but I will send it if I could in another day, and we'll talk about it next week or whatever. But the whole area being looted on purpose and the amount of stuff that is found so frequently. And I'd heard also stories about this, like in Chile and Peru especially, about there were vast areas that had huge amounts of archaeological, just whatever, stuff laying around, for a better term. And there were hundreds of thousands of holes where people had dug down looking for things, because there's always these private art collectors around. But they went to this one guy's house who bought everything from everybody who excavated. Still lives in the country, never raided by any authority. He's got thousands, tens of thousands of like silver artifacts. And they went through and panned around this dude's private collection. I was like, oh my. And I really hope I could find that video again. And thanks for reminding myself to look up that video. But there are vast chapters of history, technology, art, and metallurgy way before us that they kind of put into the fuzziness past 3,600 years. But what if the fuzziness came at 3,600 years because they also collapsed on one of these freeze cycles, magnetic change cycles? They call it the 8,200 year event, or 8.2K event. Earth's temperature dropped 5 degrees Fahrenheit, 7 in some places, in like a matter of a year, and it really disrupted crops. And they had a huge migration at that point too, which could also be the next epochs of history. They would hear about Sumerian 7,000 years, which interestingly, why do they put the Sumerian like beginnings at 7,000 years when the 8,200 year event prior caused every civilization on the planet to move, because it was such a drastic event in terms of temperature and weather anomalies? I don't know. Something's missing, and I'm just wondering how much of the history we're going to get back here. Look up the ancient city of Kish and the areas periphery to that are being looted everywhere.
Yeah, it's this article here is pretty cool because it's talking about the Sumerian city of Ur, which is named in the Bible as where Abraham came from and started the Abrahamic religions, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. But what's ironic about this is a story kind of like Follow the Money. If you follow the hidden history, it kind of tells you like a weird story if you don't pay attention to the actual propaganda. So let's start here in the city of Ur. For whatever reason, this city failed, but it failed in a weird way where they left thousands, hundreds of thousands of tablets in a library, which makes you wonder if when they abandoned the city, did they not take actually the important things? And then you brought up Saddam Hussein and the invasion of 2003, linking these cities not only in the present, but in the past. This article talks about how it's unregulated and there's plenty of chaos. People are just taking artifacts right now. So the world will not even know what some of these say. But it links to Iraq, the war in Iraq in a certain way that we did beeline for the Museum of Natural History in Baghdad. And our U.S. troops watched as mobs of what seemed to be military groups ransacked and robbed what they had in the basement there, which was recent discovery of 250,000 cuneiform tablets. So those all disappeared. There's another example. And how you track this back through history is what is Nebuchadnezzar and what's his connection to history? Well, he was the Babylonian king who was gathering ancient knowledge of his ancient past, and he did not understand it completely. So even in the Bible, what's he do? But he calls for help from another civilization who has ties to the same information, which was people from Judaism that were living in Israel, the Israelite, or Israel, however you say that in past tense, Israelites, excuse me. But he called for them and got them to come over, and they tried to open up a Stargate, and evidently it did open up, and 3 of them went in, 4 of them came out, and they described it as even the Lord was with them. But the Babylonians tried to do the same thing, and they got sick where their fingernails fell out, their hair fell out, and they got boils. sounding a lot like radiation. So if information left Ur, or any of the Sumerian cities, not just Ur, but this is a direct link that talks about the Abrahamic religions and where they came from, is Abraham, before he started writing the Bible, came from Ur. And what did he do when he came there? Well, he took ancient knowledge that he used to write the Bible or the Old Testament. So they retained this knowledge, and they built the Solomon's Temple in an ancient spot that the Sumerians also talk about, which is Israel there. And not only that, they refer to Baalbek. So we know that there were civilizations way past 7,000 years ago doing some impressive things. But it does link the disappearance or the hiding of history, because you can follow it in a line almost. Exactly. So it goes from Ur to the Middle East, and then it again, gets in the hands of, there's 3 different factions here that can all link their history back to the same time period. Like I said, pre-Pharaonic Egypt was going on when they were building the pyramids at the same time as the Sumerians here were building the ziggurat, or around, hundreds of years in relative same time. And so the information leaves from these. It goes to Egypt. It goes to Jerusalem. It goes to Mesopotamia, back to Mesopotamia. See, they were reclaiming information that they didn't have. Nebuchadnezzar was doing. And then you fast forward to now. How does it link? Well, that information allegedly was still there for whatever reason. And it also makes you wonder, why is every civilization that ends up with the information disappear? They disappear into history. So somewhere from Babylonia and Israel, the information gets into the Library of Alexandria, which again disappears, right? And then it goes into the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire turns into the Catholic Church, all in a timeline. You can just watch this. And there's another weird thing that the author Jim Mars pointed out, is that every time this happens, they erect an obelisk from the old world or a copy of that, and that the power always goes west. So you can follow it all the way through ancient times, ending up in Alexandria, and then to Rome, and then to England, and then to America. And the only thing west of us now is a communist capitalist society called the People's Republic of China. So, I don't know, but it is funny that you pointed that out, because all of this ancient stuff has been fought over and over again. I imagine that the Crusades was solely over trying to recover this information, whatever this information was. And whatever it was came from the time before any of our recognized first civilizations.
Yeah, the civilization collapse, that pings right in. You hit it on the head there. That's a perfect analysis. So the civilization collapse, it seems like it's a removal of all the information from the modern era, quote unquote, whenever that is, to create a dark age for a certain number of years, 20 years, 100 years, 150, 200 years, and then reemerge as a new superpower or economic powerhouse, whatever you like to term that as. But think about how many times in chapters in history that same thing has happened. Those with the knowledge remove it. Just like right now, what's being removed? Well, the economy's being removed. All access to energy is being removed. Eventually, if they remove access to libraries and internet, then we would go literally into a dark ages, except for the books you have on hand in your own home. Now, how vast of a library do you have? I don't know. I probably have 400 books here at the house, but it's things that I need. How to garden books, how to do special vinegars. Because, here's another thing. Just before we go on the break here, Ransom, I want to tell, but I see this civilization collapse happening. So as I know what's happening, you do too, I'm starting to take my own sovereignty back here and be like, all right, systems I relied on so far up through my life are going to, from this point forward, continue to shrink and shrink and shrink, where it's going to get either too expensive or just not available. And okay, why don't I learn how to replicate that system by doing my own growing of vegetables or buying something from another place and then turning it into my final product. That way I know where the food comes from too. So basil flowers, a lot of things are starting to flower now because we're coming into the lower light period. So everything's are flowering as we come in. So basil flowers, the reason I'm talking about this, we have like 4 different types of basil. We got African basil, red basil, the regular Italian basil, and then what you consider just like standard green basil. All of it's flowering at the same time. So, I didn't know you could eat the flowers, but you can't really. But I was reading more about like, what can we do with basil flowers? If you take them and put them in white vinegar for 2 to 4 weeks, pack that jar full of all the basil flowers you got, just pack it full and then pour white vinegar over it, white vinegar. It'll change into this most amazing basil vinegar that's served in like 5-star restaurants, because you can infuse vinegars and oils with any taste you want to. And that's how sun-dried tomatoes get their flavors and tastes. But the reason I'm even talking about the city of Ur and Samaria and trying to overlay how to make my own basil flower vinegars is because that's what's been done through history. When you look back at the most ancients of history, what was always traded? Wine, vinegar, silver, gold, and you got to look animals, livestock. And you just start to see there's repeats in history. Now, what happens if we get everything removed? Internet. And so let me see. If I was going to do a quick timeline on this, let me see here. I got some notes written down. 2022 was to destroy energy, but 2022 was to destroy the human, with all the thing. 2020 was to start to condition humanity. But as we get into each year, it seems like more things are getting destroyed. So 2023, next year, and even it's been like this whole year too. You can't tell me your food prices tripled and like things are okay. I still get people writing on my channel, and if anybody's listening to that, wrote one of these comments, when I started saying this instead of Ransom, we were talking about, early 2021 or mid 2021, saying the fertilizers are here. They're not getting to the production levels they should. Farmers are going to have a difficult time keeping the yields up without all the herbicides and pesticides, because the whole supply chains were breaking down during COVID. And people are like, well, it's not hyperinflation yet. There's no riots on the streets yet. You made a bad call. I'm like, well, how much more expensive is your electricity at your home? And then how much more expensive is food than it was even 12 months ago? If it doesn't go to the uber extreme where there's not the riots on the street from supermarkets shutting down, they're like, oh, you made a bad call. It should have been 50x by now. That if you could see the progression of at least 3 tripling of something, is that not a good enough call to say, all right, we see where it's going to go. Now we got a good gauge. So we've been forecasting a few things. So where did it lie this year? See, and then when you cut 40%, we're going to double everything next year of the losses on the fertilizer and farm inputs. So if it's a 3x this year in your food pricing, where's it going to go next year? Because you got to realize we've already hit that kind of rollover point where everything's was at a 20% deduction in global fertilizers, even 25% in many places, which decrease the yields, which we won't know yet until the harvests all the way come in, all based on magnetic field changes, which rolls back into Samaria because they're all in the same change. But here's an interesting thing, that same period, let's say 2000 BC, 4,000 years ago, Chinese history begins then with the emperors. Interesting how they all popped up. A lot of old ancient histories focused in, Egypt and pre-dynastic Egypt and Sumeria, but also what was around the planet. That's only one part of one continent, right? So then the Chinese pop up out of nowhere. And then what was going on really in South America and Australia that we don't know about because they were so far away. But there's also records of, civilizations 50,000 years prior in Australia, easily. And the deluges and the floods and the changes and all this has been documented in Australia heavily, 50,000 years. Now, South America, I can't attest to because I only know really going back, Olmec. I mean, how many, 6,000 years prior? But past that, then what's that? Because there was something past that. And when you look at the, Ransom, you could talk about the LIDAR when they go over and they find these vast cities under the jungle and, or I should say rainforest, excuse me, that was a 1950s term. How non-woke am I to call a vast rainforest area a thick jungle? Sorry, man. That was Kiplinger's book, I think. But what about soils that had been built over the limestone? Terraforming. Terra preta. Anyway, we'll be back in a couple minutes here. Ransom and I, David DuByne, son, Ransom Godwin. We'll be back in 2 minutes and 2 seconds. Continue our ancient history overlapping modern events talk.
You're listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
This is Thomas, a.k.a. a Mad Painter. I'd like you to join me Monday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Open Canvas. Don't forget to bring an open mind.
Yes, folks, that's right. Bring an open mind to an open canvas. Again, that is Monday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern. UFOs to government corruption. This is Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
Are you interested in the paranormal? Murder mystery? Real natural law? Do you enjoy interviews with amazing guests? Then join Crypt Rick every Monday night, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on Revolution Radio. Studio A, freedomslips.com. Crypt Rick's Hybrid Thinking. Welcome to the Crypt.
Join me at Revolution Radio, Studio B, at 11 a.m. on Saturday for Free Association, when we take a look at philosophy, spirituality, psychology, social issues, and geopolitics. It's every Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern on Studio B at freedomslips.com.
Enter into a world unseen on Raven Star's Witching Hour. You will encounter eclectic topics from the realm of spirit brought into our matrix of truth. With your host, the Solaris Blue Raven. Solaris will bring you an array of unique guests covering topics from ghostly spirits to amazing anomalies, covert technology, UFOs, and shadowy global events.
And that's right here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Saturdays, midnight till 2 a.m. Eastern Time. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Let the magic rise.
Galactic Interstellar Council on Revolution Radio Studio A, Fridays at 2 p.m. Eastern. Join us as we traverse the starseed paradigm, as expressed in the time-space continuum that we know as the divine expression of love and light. Integrating this conscious unity into the galactic paradigm. So welcome all, both terrestrial beings and galactic beings as one. So be it. You're listening to Revolution Radio.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Any commercial advertising you may hear in this program is of the sole discretion and benefit of the host of whose program you are listening to. Revolution Radio does not endorse any commercial products, nor does it accept monetary compensation for on-air advertising of commercial products, nor will it ever. We are and shall remain 100% listener supported. Any product advertising on this program are considered used at buyer risk, and Revolution Radio shall not be held liable for any claims or damages received from any product advertised within this program. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps. right. Thanks for listening while we take that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And yeah, we're going to get back to your host.
Welcome back to the second hour of Mini Ice Age Conversations. That last break came up pretty quickly, so we didn't finish the conversation. Thanks for staying around the second hour. I'm David DuByne, right along here with Ransom Godwin from 420 TV Freedomist Films. We're talking about inside the ziggurats. Now, I'm down in the city of Kish in Iraq, which is unguarded at the moment. But, you know, scrolling through the site here and the imagery of it, the ziggurats themselves are these massive clay bricks. I mean, massive. And then you look at what we have done in the modern recreation to, you know, stabilize something, but put sort of the same facade on it. So they have these clay bricks holding up the ziggurats on the foundational level so they don't topple over or crumble more. But I'm looking at the brick and I'm saying easily 20 of our modern bricks could fill one of the older ziggurat bricks. They're huge chunks inside. So how was it that they were using, so they say mud brick, okay, mud bricks that are 20 to 25 times larger than what you consider like a brick in your house. 25 times larger than that was one mud brick that they used to construct the ziggurats. So I don't know, there's a lot of things that were hidden, and that's what we were talking about before. And Revolution Radio, thank you for letting us talk tonight. As always, you know, some of the subjects we touch on in hidden history or rulers of that have been with the same information now with kings and queen dies, king energy comes back, war energy, World Economic Forum, pushing the agenda king, that kind of king talk would be verboten on YouTube. So if you value free speech, consider a donation to freedomslips.com. And, you know, how hidden is our history is truly the question. You know, some of this stuff looks melted for me also. It doesn't look, you know, another perfect example of melted rock is Petra, which I visited. Get this, when I first started traveling, I had a chance to come back up through Greece, but it was super safe then, up in Athens, and went up into Jordan and Turkey. And I was serving with somebody down in South Africa, so we had to fly back. You had to go north, and then back then your ticket had to continue the same direction around the world. This is early 1990. I think it was 1993, 94. I remember visiting Petra. And here's an interesting story to start the next hour off with. Like, I'd visited back there in the early 90s, Petra. There was very few guards there. There were a couple, obviously, taking ticket. Nobody walking around with guns. You didn't see any of that. Like, no freaking cafes inside. It was, you went into the ruins and it was just like, there was nothing there, like an Indiana Jones movie. Totally nothing. No, there was like maybe somebody selling water that was on a donkey or something. Nothing on the walls, no fabrics, none of that BS that I see. And then I flicked on some, recent images because I was talking about that area. So, let's go check out Petra and the images. Unbelievable, super unbelievable. Even all the images I saw, there was really nothing that didn't have, like, what you consider the modern touristy junk in there. But I remember, like, how was that a 20, 30-year change from ago? And it's difficult to find photos without anybody in there. Except what they're showing you today, like there's always been people. No, it was not like that at all. And then walking down these wadis, which are like truly sculpted by water. You could see the water erosion in it. But there were these things, and I'm a pretty skinny guy, you know, and even me, I had to take my backpack off to squeeze through them. It wasn't like you're going to get stuck all that tight, but you really couldn't walk through with a backpack on. But even a day pack is what I'm talking about. You had to take it off and like skirt through. You still had a couple inches on the chest to get through, but you definitely needed to take your pack off. These kind of wadis and all these little secret passages going, and then boom, you popped out into the Colosseum, like 5 or 10 people there. And all these images are complete. The whole thing's completely covered in fabrics and drink stands and all kind of crazy stuff. But if you look around Petra, even what I noticed back then was, if you get off where like the main trails are, I don't even know if they let you walk there anymore, but you can go way up. There's acres and acres and hundreds of acres, you know, a square mile of this stuff. where there was just carving after carving, doorway after doorway. There's nothing ornamental or ceremonial on it, but you could pop in there. And I remember one thing, looking in the sandstone caves. This is back when you had print film. This was pre-digital film, because I remember my buddy was traveling and he's like, dude, you got to get this digital camera. And it was the first time ever that it was equivalent with print film. I think it was like 5.6, something like that. That was finally equivalent with print film. It was in the 90s. But I used to roll bags of film, man. I used to get like the 400 ISO film, 200 sometimes, depending. But I would roll back with like 30, 40, canisters of 36 films and get them all developed. That's the kind of traveling time I'm talking about, going to Petra. And even back then, like you get in, it was sculpted, razor tight inside. And I was even thinking, like, how'd they get this thing so squared in here? And that's before I even knew anything about anything I'm talking about. Even at that point, when I didn't know a thing, I was in there going, how did they make this thing so perfectly square? It's like I'm in 100% perfect cube. And it was really bizarre. But what was really interesting was all the colors from the sandstone that went down the sides. They show you the images and you might think there's some yellows in there, maybe some oranges. Oh, no. Once you dig in there deeper, it turns into the purples and the greens. And you start getting all this amazing different colored sandstone, deep blacks, like obsidian black right next to a purple layer. There is them. The only way you could possibly get that is if you melted something, and then you start to look at the facades and the outside of these same areas that aren't, like, say, ceremonial, but, half a mile from the main site, and it looks like the mountaintops are melted. And I have seen this in an enormous amount of places, from Iran over to Iraq, and even what you would consider, that's why they were down in that chasm down there. The Hittites, 5,000 years prior, they used to worship the magic mushroom. They were the ones that were in charge of all commerce that flowed through that area in and out of. In Jordan, exactly the same place you're talking about. They took refuge in that to survive. But I do say that absolutely unequivocally, from what I've learned about plasma discharges and many places I've been, traveling around the Middle East, I have seen the same thing, but I didn't know what I saw until I understood it. So when Ransom's talking about plasma petroglyphs, I am looking at melted structures that were scarred. Scotland has a few melted castles too. So whatever it is plasma discharges. Maybe it's a rip or a tear in the electromagnetic field, and then ionized radiation is allowed to come down from space and spills onto the ground way above the UVC. Forget that. That's only like cooking, anything organic, human living type UVC would be detrimental, like a microwave oven. But then throw the protons down there, spin in some electrons, hit that thing with the most cosmic high radiation that you can imagine, and then melt everything. And then whoop, the magnetic field tightens in that area, and whatever that buffer shield is back in place again. I don't know, Ransom. I'm babbling now, but I got another story about the Wadi Rum Desert as well, of melted whatever out there too.
Yeah, well, that's everywhere, and that actually fits into a theory of mine that when you look back in history, I think I'm showing it to everybody. Let me see.
It's 11/11 on 2022. Perfect.
Right, it is. So this chart that I'm showing starts at 3000 BC. This is where it starts. But my theory is that these are factions of whatever ancient world was ancient, because they were restarting society from not scratch, but from information that we were talking about before. Follow the missing information. So if you look at who popped up, you got the Sumerians, you got the Indus Valley, you got the pre-dynastic Egyptians. Somewhere over here in the Americas, we don't know when, a civilization was building megalithic stones. Now, they don't put that on this chart, which I find it ironic, because we know that they don't. Here, I'll show everybody something. According to this chart, the Aztec and the Inca built some of the stuff that we're talking about, but we know that's nonsense. That didn't even start till 1200 AD. when the Incans found these places and started building a more primitive rubble style building and started reusing the complexes. But let's put a timeline down here of what I think is going on here. At least 4 different factions, if not 5, separated all over the earth around 3000 BC and tried to restart civilization with a complex and vast amount of knowledge. And what's some information to support my theory here? Well, this is when all of the major megalithic stuff was built. You got the Great Pyramids of Giza, you got the ziggurats, you got the Indus Valley culture that was building these massive cities and stuff. And then over here in the Americas, somewhere in this 1,000-year period, some civilization was building megalithic stuff over here in the Americas. And then shortly after that, let's say about 600 or 700 years later, after these empires are going really well and civilization is back on track with a lot of detailed, complex information. And a thing that I'm saying that also supports this is look at the Sumerians and what they were writing about. And you kind of were talking about a minute ago about what do you do with these these oregano flowers and blah, blah, blah. Well, you look into the Sumerian culture and what were they doing? What were they putting on these tablets? Well, they were putting, for probably the first time in writing, because it seems like the civilization prior did not use writing in the same way, which makes you wonder if they were telepathic or some other kind of explanation. But at least 3000 BC onwards, civilization decided we need to start writing things down. And what were they writing? Well, they were writing recipes for beer, recipes for chicken soup, property, where property was. They were writing they were writing how-to-dos, do it yourselves, right? They showed the plow on these little cuneiform cylinder seals. And then you have over in Egypt, they're building these massive pyramids. Somewhere in Mexico, a civilization was preparing to build Teotihuacan, the first city that we know of that's a massive city in the Americas, which also has this complex mathematics. So they restarted civilization with a lot of information right about 3000 BC. But about 700 years later, all of these civilizations disappear. And guess what else we find? And all of these places that are probably built in connection with these civilizations are these plasma burn looking things, or vitrified stone, which seems to happen over and over again throughout time. But some evidence of that is in Cusco, in the Anwar province in Egypt, where most of the giant megalithic stuff comes from. And I'm not talking about the later stuff that they started building, but the original stuff, kind of like the Great Pyramid, the giant andesite stones of one statue of one person or one needle. These things are massive, but some of them are burned and melted in weird ways. And you find that in Cusco as well. You find that in Pumapunku and all these ancient cities. So something happened right there that reset everything for, let's say, from 2200 to 1800 roundabouts. And then civilization starts over again. With some recognizable civilizations here in the next 300 years after 2000. You get the Hittites, you get the Shang dynasty in China, you get the Minoan civilization, Crete, you get the New Kingdom in Egypt, the people that showed up and started writing on stuff. And then you get the Olmec civilization, which seems to have done the same thing. They came across some pre-made stuff, and then all of a sudden everything just starts over again at the new 1,000-year mark. Now, keep in mind the astrology dates on these, because they also, down here at the bottom of this chart, show you the start of religion. And you got 2500, you got Hinduism, and then around 2000, you have Judaism, and then Buddhism shortly after 1000 BC, and then Christianity, a couple hundred years later there, right about 1 AD. And it just goes from there. But each time that they rebuild the civilization, information is lost, and then you start seeing these wars start happening between the empires, trying to get this ancient knowledge that's prior to 3000 BC to whoever the big megalithic builders were, which we know had metallurgy. We know that they had all of these sciences, but they didn't write it down. And guess what? You also get in this 3000 BC period, each of the civilizations that pop up between 3000 BC and 1000 BC, and there's a common theme with all of these. They all are talking about gods or someone else that gave them this complex information, right? the Chinese civilization started with a similar story. You have over in Central America, you got the dragons, you got Quetzalcoatl, you got Kukulkan, and down in South America they had the Viracocha, and then you go over to the Indus Valley, and then you get into India, and you got all of their gods that pop up and give them knowledge, and then the Sumerians talk about the Anunnaki. So these are all the same things happening at the same places around a couple of 100-year periods of each other each time. And each time it seems like it's a diminished information. Now I want to circle this back to now. A little while ago, you were talking about how, you still got books to tell you how to do stuff. Well, we look at this chart and you get up to modern times and modern empires, like just in the last 1,000 years. And let's just fast forward it up to stuff we recognize, like the USSR, the PR of China, you got the United States of America, and all of this stuff, the European colonization of Australia, and all of these things are happening. And then you get to now, and we're at the end of these. You can look just at this chart and see that each civilization cycle gets shorter and shorter each time with less and less complex information till we get now. And the recent empires, what do? Right at the beginning of their brand new empire is they go around to each person in each village, in each township, and they take their books and they burn them. A last ditch information destruction to make sure that the population cannot start over by itself, but need either the gods or the elites or whatever form that it'll take the next period. And you can see that. So, I also have weirdly a big library of books. I just started taking books that were free, people were throwing away, whatever. They're on all kinds of different stuff, but I have them on electricity, on how to, farming. I've been doing that. And then all of these meta sciences and stuff that people believe in the 50s and 60s, and history books that are pre-World War II that have a totally different story of what post-World War II history says the world history is. So you get this massive amount of, it seems like the biggest force in history of humans is to suppress any kind of beneficial information. And if it starts getting to where the civilization goes around the control mechanisms like we are now, and probably they were in ancient times right before they were destroyed, the government moves in, or whatever power structure there is, if it's a church, a religion, a government, and they destroy everything so that they can be the only source, the only answer, and the only hope for populations. And it seems like what has to be necessarily with all of these things is you got to point out that there was massive amounts of human loss. And you can pick any empire you want, going back all the way to 3000 BC, where we're kind of keeping track of it. And each of those empires, something happened that caused mass starvation. So you could point out the Mayan Empire, something happened right there. And is this weather changes? And I would say it is. But how do the elites know when the exact time that these patterns change is kind of the question, because if you overlay this information, you can see a clear pattern of manipulation of information at the peak of each society right before the natural cycles make it hard to have civilization, and then they reset the information. And I would say that we're here at that point right now, based on the amount of ever expanding information destruction. And you already see it starting. They're calling it hate speech. They're banning this, they're banning that. And it's the same cycle over and over again. It's just this time we get the communist version of it. But it still implies that at the end of this cycle of empires and the beginning of the new one, there necessarily has to be a mass destruction of information and a mass culling of the people. And all indications are saying we're at that time.
Yeah, are we at that time? Books are going to be an important thing. And I did get sidetracked and went off on a tangent, but I was talking about books. You can find a great amount of books at estate sales, but the older books that are unadulterated. Now, the older the estate sale, obviously, the older the residents of the estate sale, the older the books are going to be. I routinely come across books from the 1900s, 1920s, 1930s. That is like the average old date. So I seek out these old history books and things that are not changed. And I try to find, if I have time, I'll lay out a couple of the books and I'll try to find something with like an encyclopedia reference to a timeline reference, something, and see if it's changed compared to what's out there today. Because those written in the books before. And another thing you want to seek out is any type of medical book. Like there's amazing books out there about, field hospital, emergency medicine, which was a common thing in the 1950s. I mean, that's the basics compared to today. But still, if you have that, it's much better than nothing. And then you can start to scale your collection of medical literature, medical encyclopedias, medical how-tos. Start with the Boy Scout guide. There's a ton of that stuff from like the 1950s and 60s, all these Boy Scout guides on, first aid medicine. There's tons and tons of books and stuff. That's exactly what you're going to need. Because I tell you, I got stung by yellow jackets today. I was working on the raspberry plants, and we're putting out some more wire because they're growing taller, and we wanted to clip them onto the wire at the top of the post. It's about 6 feet up because that's about all the bigger they're going to get. But we wanted to get them everything kind of condensed in the wire so it can grow super tall next year and bear fruit and really get it to a good start. But there was this little hole I noticed last time near there, and I was like, oh, I wonder what that was. I thought it was like a mole. I don't know what it was. Ended up it was yellow jackets. Stepped over it a couple of times. Man, they came up and stung me across a couple places on my right foot, right where the boot where you tie it, where you like that tongue's tied down. And they crawled down in there and stung me. I had to take out my boot. And the other one stung me too, to the point where I had to rip off my sock. Crazy. What do? What if you have anaphylactic shock for somebody who's gotten stung by a bee? What if they're having a reaction? What if it's fire ants? What if it's something else? Scorpion sting, snake bite. I mean, all this is covered in just the very simplest of like Boy Scout, Eagle Scout Journal, Boy Scout first aid medicine stuff. Go to thrift shops, secondhand shops. Like, a popular one here is Salvation Army. I know they don't carry so many books, but if you tell the person in there that you're looking for these kind of books, they'll get them for you. It's one of those kind of things. And there should be a store in every single community where builders who have an extra couple of pallets or a couple extra boxes of something, they'll donate it for a tax write-off. And this store becomes sort of a consolidator for things in the home along with all the building materials, but they occasionally get books also. There's one here called CARM. People donate things. But this reset is a real deal. Once the information goes, and if your monitor turns off and you don't have access to the internet, what are you going to do? Because Ransom, I liked it that you said you had regular radio that you were listening to when you were further remote. Because that's kind of where we're going to go back to. Like, who's prepared to have AM, FM, hand-cranked radio that doesn't require any new batteries, but you can charge it solar-wise and crank it both, AM, FM. That's the very most basic you can get. Now, if you can get a scanner so you can listen in on other channels, CB radios, marine radios, ham radios. That way, even if you don't have the skill to run all of it, somebody else that's going to be around you will. If you're in that kind of crowd, because Ransom, I know for sure you know a fair few people that if you said, well, I got this ham radio, I can't quite get the, does anybody know the repeater channels around here? Somebody's going to know that. And you're going to be able to utilize that piece of equipment, even though you don't know how to use it, somebody else will. And then what? Then you're on your solar generator, on your whatever Renogy or Ecolife or what's another, Yeti or something, that you're going to be trying to recharge all your stuff all the time? Who's going to be able to recharge and then run Starlink satellite off of these systems where there's no power for months, but you're still recharging everything solar-wise, able to recharge all your flashlights, all your phones, all your radios and everything, and still run your Starlink satellite by using solar panels? Because see, it is going to be lost to civilization knowledge. But between then and me staying alive, my book collection, again, if your house burns down or if you got marauders coming in. Oh, that was a funny thing. Can I make a quick comment here, Ransom? Remember when there was all these riots in South Africa, and they went through, and it was about a 7-day period. It was just a few months. It was probably like 8 months, 6-8 months ago. South Africa had these massive riots. But here's another thing to consider. The rioters, where did they go? They went into the used storage kind of self-storage places first because they knew it was loaded full of stuff, like good stuff. Very few people don't pay their bills where they have to auction those off. Because I talked to when I first got back, I started consolidating some stuff that I wanted to get for furniture and tools for the farm. Didn't have a place to put it because I was crashing in somebody else's spot, and they didn't want me to store it there, and that's cool. I appreciate it, I respect that. Dude, I got a bunch of disc hose and weed eaters and farm stuff. Can I leave it in your garage? They're like, we don't have space for that. That's like farm stuff, dude. Okay. So anyway, talking to the lady who was running the used store, I was like, hey, what about these things about auctions? Because sometimes you watch these things online, or like, oh, they found like a, whatever, some amazing treasure in one of these used stores. And she's like, no, dude. 99 times out of 100, it's complete junk. And I was asking her, like, how many people really default? And she's like, oh, not very many, really. Because people don't want to get their stuff. They're paying the extra, maybe I'm an overdue bill for an extra $50 a month is worth. You pay that to get, several $1,000s worth of stuff out of there. So like very few people like let it roll over and just leave everything. If they do, it's really not worth anything because they would come and get it. Those used store places were the first things hit in the South African riots. Supermarkets second. Then thirdly, all the malls were completely just gutted and destroyed and smashed windows, and just like they took everything out of everything. Except, I remember seeing this photo, they did not go into the bookstore. Not go into the bookstore. None of the windows were broken on the bookstore. The place was not trashed. It was not looted. And you got to realize this during the, probably I say, number one ever, I guess, event of civil unrest in South Africa ever to occur, ever. And the bookstore was not broken into. So if your house is looted and they're coming in and they're trying to find like your, I have one of the lanterns. I got an oil burning lamp behind me. Okay, they'll take that, but they're probably going to leave the books. So you got that going for you. And that's where I'll leave it. You got that going for you. Like your book collection is probably going to be pretty solid and safe compared to, I don't know, a camera or something. People aren't just going to run into your house and steal books. Rarely do they do that. Even in like complete anarchy, they leave the books alone. That's crazy, except for when like the elitists want to destroy them. So I don't know. We're getting into the average person versus the elitist for societal control on what books mean or destroying them.
That's why you got to convince the populations that it's dangerous and that a certain group of people have privilege because they have books and they know how to read them and stuff. There's several sci-fi movies kind of about that and books and stuff like that, but we've already seen real examples of it. The Nazi Party burned books because history didn't align with the new story they were telling. You had the communist Chinese burn books, et cetera, et cetera. And like we pointed out, it's been going on every time. It seems like populations have the ability and the access to large amounts of information so that they could become on the cusp of self-sustaining, not mental giants, but pretty educated, like the jack of all trades type of people. Those are the people that don't starve. Those are the people that don't need help. And you're right about that. I wouldn't be worried about the mobs of people stealing your books or nothing like that. However, they might come and burn them because someone told them that they're symbols of hate or whatever reason that they brainwash people into getting rid of books. I think it's going to be a money source. When you have it and someone else does it, they'll be willing to trade you something nice for the information or just to borrow it. And think about this idea. A lot of people do think that they have this delusion probably that if society fails, that somehow they bought enough gizmos and gadgets that they'll be checking on the satellite with their Starlink or whatever. But kind of an example of that, the way I think it's going to go, is that none of that stuff's going to be there. It's going to fall out of orbit because just think about the early days of cable TV and satellite TV. All through I would say about 2010-ish, about right there. Anywhere you would drive, you would see these old unused satellite dishes at somebody's property that no longer used because they got the new stuff. They got the direct TV with the new satellite because that old satellite's not even functioning. And the same thing will kind of be with these new satellite links. And it's funny that Elon Musk is selling a throwaway, temporary, convenient thing. And he's talking about flooding the entire Earth now. He's bragging next year his new satellites will cover every square inch of the Earth. There will be no dead zones. However, I don't think that this is going to be used the way that we think it's going to be. This will be used for tracking, and the ones that are up there for information, we already saw what happened with a little bit of solar activity. Half the satellites crashed to the Earth, and they don't work. So what you'll see is these properties with these old satellite dishes and Starlinks that don't do anything. They're just paperweights there. However, the person that stashed back books, and this is funny because we know that in ancient societies, the Dead Sea Scrolls might be an example of that, but others are, where people hid information away from the powers that be. And they stayed hidden for a while. And this kind of went in different directions, these secret schools, cults, but also like even within the religious organizations, we know the Vatican stockpiled different information from around the world, but they were looking for that information and they knew it was there. So I think the peasant or the public or the, not the elite people should be thinking in the same lines as they are, because that's who's running things. So basically, we're going to have to turn into where we have secret stashes of information. We can't just verbal stories, because we can tell that didn't quite come across probably the way it was originally passed on. There's massive amounts of cultures around the world that use oral traditions to pass down information. And it's kind of like that game when you were in elementary school where you whisper in somebody's ear and then they whisper in somebody's ear. And at the end, the message is all messed up. And that's where we're at right now, trying to decipher this ancient information, the petroglyphs, all of these old stories about gods and technologies, possibly. We're right at that point where we're about to crack it open. So that's what tells you that they'll reset it again. It kind of reminds me basically of the way that the government treats new and emerging technologies. If you're not familiar with that term, look it up. There's all kinds of weird stuff going on about how to regulate, stop, control, or mandate any kind of emerging technologies. Now, they used to call it disruptive technologies, but they have a new term for it. And that's another idea of, like, I can't find the old links, the old stuff that used the term disruptive technologies. Now it's called new and emerging technologies with the potential for disruption. and you look at these lists of stuff, they're all of the kind of technological marvels that would send humans into a new direction, free energy, better healthcare, all of these things. And we know by example, if, let's use cancer for an example. If it's a $900 billion a year industry, what's in their motivation to cure cancer? I mean, there is no motivation. And it seems to be like our entire healthcare system is set up in this way. It's based on and backed up off of the idea of billing everything, like we've talked about before, your electricity, your gas, your water, your air in the form of carbon rules, and protecting the environment. And I equate that basically to, they've been trying to formulate a way to even tax you breathing. But that's only to get them to a certain point. And I think we're about at that certain point. And if you notice, everybody's taking all the wealth. That's what's been happening since 2008, I would say. The biggest transformation of wealth, as Obama coined it, started then. And it's been going all the way until now, and they couldn't even find enough reasons to take the money. I mean, they're coming up with new silly things that they're just still in billions and now into the trillions and trillions of dollars. Isn't that crazy? And that tells you that they're getting ready for a new move after they've collected all the wealth back up. It's that cycle. You ease out the wealth to build civilization. When you're ready to change, you suck it all back up. And unfortunately for, the regular folks, that means that you need to plan ahead. And books are good for more than just being on shelves. They're good for reading. And that's what anybody should be doing right now, so they don't have to wait till they don't have stuff to go, oh, well, where's that book? That book would be more useful to you as a bartering system or to relaying the information to other people now, that it's a necessity. But I don't think you're just going to sit around for 2 years during the apocalypse studying up on a subject to get good at it. Put it into practice, in other words, right now.
Yeah, I was trying to, respond to such a large set of ideas coming together. How do you put this, what we see as this massive connection of dots together into a way to explain it easily and simply to somebody else? So you could start those conversations to get people on the same track. Yeah, we got a problem. It's a cycle. It's inbound. Look at the past. It follows a trend, and we're at this point again where this trend line is being followed. So some of these things are going to follow the same mechanisms as they did prior. So if you can look back in history, you can see how things were deindustrialized, deconstructed, de-economicized, if that's a word. Hey, maybe I just made a new word. De-economized or something. Remember the first one. But if you understand that that's how it works at the end of the cycle where we're at right now, then you can get sort of a gauge on, okay, in the last 3 of these 4 times, these 2 things happened. And you just match up his chapters in history. What is going to disappear? Will the technology be allowed to be used for? Why did the printing press come around? Why did I'm asking a lot of questions about why did things start when they did? After looking at cryptocurrency for quite some time, why did it start in late 2008, 9, and 10? The technology was good enough in the year 2000 to run the same. Why was it put off for 10 or 12 years is the question. And then the satellites, will they be taken offline? Why was the printing press put in at the exact same time? The printing press had a massive, massive, massive effect on society because before that, I think we were at the pre-reset before. So look at the printing press and maybe the 100 years before that as the re-beginning of what we're going into now. That will be the destruction, and the new beginning will be at that point where the printing press was and kingdoms were stabilized and the printing press came along. And so where the kingdoms were stabilized after that pre-crash, it took those whatever amount of time, and then suddenly the printing press was there to change it for the next set of control over humanity. I'm not sure exactly. But see, talking such a deep subject to people, how do you phrase that in a few seconds? Like this volcanic eruption cycle is also involved with this whole magnetic field cycle. So when you get the eruption, see, nobody's talking about Tonga, which I have again and again and again. So in like a 30-second elevator speech, the Tonga eruption in the southern hemisphere was 3 times bigger than the Pinatubo eruption. And I'll be generous and say it was double the Pinatubo eruption. But Pinatubo cooled the Earth's climate 0.7 of a degree. This is going to be at least a 1.5 C cooling just off the Tonga eruption. It affects the entire southern hemisphere where everybody's looking to grow more food because we're having a crop shortage in the northern hemisphere and growing 20% than we did last year. So maybe we need to get an extra bag of food. I don't know, an extra 20-pound bag of rice. Oh, India stopped exporting rice today. Sorry, forgot to tell you. Only broken rice, 20% tariff, and so curtailed back, they're saying you have to ask for permission for the shipments to leave. So who's to say that 100% of the shipments will be said, well, we gave the application, but it was just to deny the application. Like they can buy another month before the details, 2 months before the real numbers have to come out. Like this is affecting global agriculture, as it has every time, every single time. So we're looking at the beginning mechanism of the collapse of the food supply on the natural cycle. But it'll be used and ridden on top of to create something, and then a new control mechanism can run out of. Like, this information was known 20 years ago, 15 years ago, easily. And in the last 10 years, absolutely, unequivocally, 1,000% known that we were heading into this electromagnetic change cycle that would impact volcanism and earthquakes. Tectonics are also affected by this. Same, it's electromagnetic changes on the entire planet that affects the crust of the planet, because they're intertwined, they're connected. So energetic events, whether it be occurring in space or on sky, one of those either charges or discharges. And that equilibrium sometimes snaps rock. When it does that discharge in that fraction of a millisecond, there's such energy release and it cracks rock. Fracking is just the unridiculous example to even try to explain what that is. But go on to a planetary level. All of this intertwines in. So we go through the volcanic, whatever it is, the food shortages, you have to look at where they would come from. Is it really the natural, or is it what we're seeing now as a constriction purposefully of all economy across the planet to create fertilizer shortages? Which then the excuse could be next year, oh, there was a 40% fertilizer shortage on the planet. That's why the crops came in so low for the yields. That's why things that we've grown before for the last 100 years are only 50% of what we ever got before. That's because there wasn't enough fertilizer, which all winds into this cycle of the deconstruction or de-evolution or whatever you like to term it as. Deindustrialization occurs happening on the same thing with the Tonga eruption, same cycle. So for me, again, looking at correlations here, like the spread of the ash cloud and the effect on Southern Hemisphere agriculture and how much they're going to understand it and get numbers for it this first year. Because the first year is going to be, as all volcanic eruptions before, it's going to be the lighter of the 2 years. So next year in 2023 is going to be the super incredible, most intense effect of how much cooled temperatures, how much light has been. I'm talking total solar irradiance on, I guess, watts per meter squared on a basis where you're looking at the amount of sunlight or radiation, same, penetrating through the cloud layer to hit the ground surface. That can be measured also, in addition to the optical depth of how much aerosol is in the air, how much ash is in the air, how much water vapor is in the air. All reflective as well. So they get a really good reflectivity index of all these, I guess, 3 different, at least the base minimums. And then you're going to have all that ash that's around there that's changing weather patterns because it's grabbing a lot more droplet and becoming particulates of droplets and really starting to create more clouds and more rainout events in the Southern Hemisphere. So with this now, how are they going to come clean, really? Would you explain to the populace that it's this cycle and this is here, and Earth's carrying capacity regulates itself naturally? Okay, get ready, buy some tools. We should have been doing this for 15 years on teaching everybody how to build their own soils, and I could just rant for days on what we should have been taught, how to work together, how to get our gardens going, how everybody should have chickens. We could have done this 15 years ago on a global level. Every night, front page news, what did you do today to get more yield out of your yard? Kind of newscasts. But they didn't, because they need the same thing to happen. Massive loss, erase the history, erase the culture. 200 years later, the same information pops out again. Completely intact, just like it was in Sumeria. It came fully intact. Engineering, writing, mathematics, chemistry, astrology, astronomy, it all came instantly with a fully formed society, just like copy. It's like a preformed kit, and you just drop it and it grew like a chia pet for the earth of knowledge. Are we back at the cycle again? Absolutely. We're at the beginning of it. You see things are changing. So how would you get ready for the next 4 or 5 years of change versus the next 3 months? I don't know. Those are a lot of questions. I don't have the answer, but I probably should put something out to, okay, what do you expect the next 5 years based on what happened in the last year, what's forecast for 2023, put that into some deep writings to, prior what's happening now based on the prior, and then what's forecast for next year based on what we're seeing now. Those things going across 3 years of timescape, and then from there extrapolating out 24, 25, 26, and seeing what happened. I don't know. I need a researcher to help. Ransom, back to you, man.
You know, I kind of wanted to tie these cycles up because you were mentioning the magnetic field. So we kind of know what happens if the magnetic field collapses to the point that it is now, because the only thing that we have to refer to is the last time that we think it happened, or at least that it's documented, because they found evidence saying 42,000 years ago. So some weird things happened then. Like we've talked about this a little bit before, but here's a bigger idea. We were talking about these civilizations just popping up about 3000 BC, and the areas in which they popped up, which is the area in Indus Valley, and then over in the top of Africa, you got Egypt, but then over in the Americas, something is going on over there in preparation for building a big city at least. And no one knows who did that. We don't know the people that built Teotihuacan, but someone did, and they had complex knowledge. I assume that that's the same people that gave the Olmec the calendar, and this is some of the same way that they got it at that time. But when you think about what was happening at those places, some weird stuff was happening, just like you said, writing, right? And we came up with all these ideas, but those areas happen to be the same places that the magnetic poles are moving to. So we know the North Pole is moving towards probably what looks estimated to around India or the area in Indus Valley. And on the other side of the world, the Southern Pole would be moving more closer to Mesoamerican area and the Yucatan Peninsula. Now, I don't know if that happens every time it does that, but we do know that something weird happens. And we know that the Neanderthals went extinct along with a lot of the large animals on the earth. They just disappeared. But another weird thing that happened is human beings, the ones that later, tens of thousands of years later, the same human beings started painting on the walls. They invented art, and all of a sudden were expanding their minds at this time during a polar shrinkage and flip that was going on. So it definitely probably affected the minds of the survivors of that. Now, let's put a weird idea. If you saw Neanderthals doing good for, a couple 100,000 years before humans even show up on the scene, and you knew that this new situation on the earth was going to kill them, and they're your direct competition, would you tell them the information? You probably wouldn't. And that, I'm not saying that ancient men knew about what was going to happen, but they might have, because all through history, people were wearing red ochre as if they knew the amount of ultraviolet light was pouring in at different, amounts at different times. And that's one thing that we know was happening when this magnetic field collapse and switch was happening, is that not only were people coming up with new expanded cognition and ideas, more ultraviolet light was pouring into the earth, mutating stuff, and we know speciation happens at that same time. But now you fast forward till now, and we're kind of in that same exact scenario. So maybe that is literally the reason that the information gets destroyed every time, is in preparation for the next level of human, because it seems like we keep getting advanced at the same time as the information disappears, right? The better thinkers later. Right, and it keeps coming in cycles. But what would we be changing into now? Like if ancient man was just now, painting on the rocks, and then later all of a sudden, for whatever reason, they started writing, and now we're at this point. What is about to happen to human beings and their behavior? It kind of mixes into that idea, because we know something very traumatic happens to the behavior of the life that lives on Earth. So if we're going into that, you would expect maybe the same thing to be happening, or at least I would. And it's weird that the areas in which the poles move to seem to be, somewhat linked to the beginnings of civilizations, in my view. So what update or what upgrade are we about to have that's hastened this fast changeover and dramatic change in civilization worldwide that we see unfolding?
Yeah, I didn't think about that. You filled in a piece of the puzzle for me. Because you look at the transhumanist movement and you think that they're trying to create a new type of human that will, think faster, run faster, collate data faster. And it's always something about the mind and maybe something augmented for the human physiology to make it move faster, something like this. Transhumanism. But what if, I never thought about that until you said it, that shift every time of the human shifts to something different. What if we naturally were equal with the transhumanists and they're trying to build it through technology to equal what the human will become during this shift? They're using our minds against us to think that the shift, that the transhumanists will be way stronger and way faster and way better at everything than regular Homo sapiens sapien, me and you, that we'll have to run for cover and live in the forest from these things. But perhaps that's the mind programming where just the natural changes, we'd even be more powerful. So I have to try to use technology to meet the evolving human mind. That's pretty interesting, man. That was a good call right there.
That seems to be the direction of all these companies too, right? Is hijack us not only from the DNA, but also our cognition.
Yeah, and you wonder what subliminal advertising is doing in the cognition as well, too. I stumbled across this subliminal advertising thing from like the 1970s. Old, they were doing like Coca-Cola commercials and stuff in it to show you. Old doctors smoking kind of commercials in it. So what about the subliminal with the cognition? What are the patents that are out there to affect the human thought? What happens, there's so many out there patents that certain electrical effects on a brain could make a human move fingers or move legs or do something, but you can't really control the entire movements, thoughts of that body outside itself. But maybe you can now. So would an AI try to run all of these new transhumans to try to compete with the new evolution of human under the new electromagnetic frequency change higher off the sun? We're looking at an entirely new magnetic field that sets again. It's going to lock us into something different and coming through the yuga cycles and faster vibratory energies specifically from the sun. Like we're going through a more energetic part of space. The entire spiral arm of the galaxy is not just our star, but part of the entire galaxy is moving through this energetic area. It moves faster. So I don't know, this farm called Earth seems to reset. The Great Reset is more about control over humanity. And I really believe we can actually outperform the transhumanists, because that's what we're destined to be, the upgrade to flow the creator through us.
Maybe this is silly, but when we think about whatever civilization was way back before we started keeping track of history in a written or a oral tradition, it seems like those people did not need writing. So with deductive logic means that they may have been talking telepathically. And if we were going into a similar time period, you would want to necessarily hijack that or eavesdrop on that. And they would do it the same way they do your phone calls, your emails, and everything else physically now. But if people begin to start telepathically communicating, what's the powers to be? How are they to control the information this time? I'm just saying that's maybe off the wall, but it does seem like at least one civilization in our history was able to accomplish things without oral or written tradition.
Chip in the brain is my answer. I'll take door number one, chip in the brain. Because if you can control the brain, you can control the flow of what you talked about, telepathic information, inbound or outbound. So people, they bait and switch, like put it in your brain, you'll think faster, you do that. Yeah, well, what if it's to have something that would shut down that telepathic communication? And that's the whole plan, to trap everybody in transhumanism. We are going places across this universe right now, energetically, that powers that are in control are terrified of. So vibrate faster through the week. Think positive thoughts. Don't buy into chaos. Float above it as a hot air balloon looking down below. Keep that.
Thank you for listening.